I think our identity is never really just us or our kids or our family, but it's who we are in this bigger picture of the culture.
Calling all supermoms. Grab your coffee, tea, water, smoothie, wine, or a cocktail, and join us for a dose of laughter, camaraderie, and the reassurance that you are not alone. We're diving into the complexity of modern motherhood because every mom deserves a mic drop. I'm Vanessa McAfee.
And I'm Renee Arthur.
And we are the hosts of the Motherhood Moments podcast. We are two sisters from Michigan who both had babies during the pandemic. After a few years of getting this new role of motherhood under our belts, we felt curious about how other moms are doing this mom thing. We decided to dive deeper and interview some amazing moms in our network, and we want to bring you into our network and share their stories with you.
Hello to all of our lovely listeners. Buckle up for a fascinating journey as we welcome our next guest, Christine, to the Motherhood Moments podcast. Hailing from the charming town of Ann Arbor, our guest has ventured far and wide in her travels, from the west side of Michigan to the vibrant energy of Spain and the bustling cityscapes of Chicago. But like any good story, our guest on her way back home to Ann Arbor, driven by the desire to be closer to friends and create roots in a familiar place. And here's where the plot thickens. Love entered the scene. Our guest tied the knot with a man whose roots trace back to the heart of Mexico. Picture this, a chance meeting someone at a church where our guest was on the hunt for both a new spiritual community and a connection in the vibrant Hispanic community right here in Michigan. Destiny played its part, and our guest's life began a new chapter. Christine is a mom with a career. Our guest is no stranger to the world of research, specializing in the intricate roles of clinical trials. It's a profession that requires precision, dedication, and a keen eye for details, qualities that undoubtedly spill over into the role as a mom. Raising a dynamic duo, a girl and a boy, our guest navigates the challenging waters of motherhood with grace and humor. Today, we'll dive into the joys and the trials and the heartwarming moments that come with being a mom in today's fast-paced world. Welcome to the show, Christine.
Welcome, Christine.
Muchísimas gracias. Estoy muy feliz por estar aquí con ustedes hoy.
Está bien. Hablo español un poquito.
Muy bien. We can change to English. We don't have to do the whole thing.
No, más español, más español.
It's such a joy to be here. It's very exciting.
So, will you tell us, how did bedtime go tonight?
Well, during the intro, I'm not sure if anyone heard the falling, crashing noises. I'm actually sitting below my children. They share a room, and I don't think that they're sleeping, is my guess. Seems that bedtime didn't go quite yet. So I have a 4.5-year-old named Mateo and a 2.5-year-old named Catalina. And Catalina sometimes doesn't go to bed when she's supposed to. She sometimes sleeps until 10:30 in the morning. We're not sure what's up with her, but we're definitely sure she's getting those genes from her dad.
So they share a room.
They do. They share a bunk bed, actually.
Oh, wow.
Toddlers in a bunk bed.
Toddlers in a bunk bed. We switched a couple weeks ago, like 3 weeks ago. Our 4.5-year-old was in an actual crib up until that time. So he was just comfortable. We're like, all right, well, I guess we're not going to change it. But he also was a little bit too big for his crib. It was time. It was overdue. How did bedtime go for you guys tonight?
It went swimmingly well. And usually it doesn't go as well as it did today, but I was really, really focused on it. Starting around like 3 p.m. today, I was really blocking out my time. I felt like I was prepping for an interview or something. Like I was like, I cannot be late and I can't be off schedule. So I made sure that dinner was like ready on time. And we didn't no TV this evening. Lots of reading.
Nice.
And listening to, instead of watching the videos my son likes to watch, we just listened to those songs. And he was actually pretty satisfied with that. So that was nice. And then we did shower early. And then we just read. I just read him down. Like I just wear him down with the books. I have to sleep on the floor in his room until he goes to sleep.
Oh,
I still cannot leave him. Other people can put him down, but he tells me, Mama, sit. Like it's like a whole thing now. And now I'm stuck. And if I don't do it, he'll cry for up to an hour. But I just laid there. And as soon as he sleep, I can get up and leave.
Do you have like a little mat?
I have a very plush comforter.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes I do like social media scrolling, or sometimes I just meditate. But nonetheless, I still feel held hostage a little bit. It went okay.
he's asleep, right? That's a win.
I think Lolo is asleep. We also did an earlier bedtime today because of the show. The show is really helping Renee and I to, at least for one night a week, be getting our bedtime together a lot earlier. She came home, we had dinner, we also read a lot, and then I was just moving things along. We did bath, we did all the normal things. There was just less play in between, less talking. Lolo loves to talk. And that was like, okay, we got to be doing the final story at 7:30. So we stuck to that.
That's awesome. I would say that usually bedtime does go much smoother. Well, I don't know if they're awake or if we're also doing construction in our house right now because we're always doing construction in our house. So I'm not sure if it's that or if it's my children.
And I know that having two is very different than having one.
Yes. The whole sharing the room thing. Like there are days when I've just been like, why don't we just put them in separate rooms? It would be so much easier because then the one can just sleep and doesn't have to deal with his not horrible younger sister, but she just gets in these moods where she just like attacks him or goes after him or whatever at bedtime when she's supposed to be sleeping. And he puts up with a lot. So then we feel bad, like bad parents, because the poor guy just wants to sleep and he just gets annoyed all the time. But I think it will build character at some point in time for the two of them. That is my hope.
Toddlers in a bunk bed could be like a whole video series for me.
Absolutely.
Totally.
I'm very curious about the stories about that. So we do want to know a little bit about you and especially your career. So you have two little people, which is amazing, and you work. So you're going to have to spill the tea because there's so many of our listeners who maybe don't have children yet, who are really focused on their career right now and thinking about how do you even manage to transition or change? Do you change? How do you make it all work? Being a mom, having a career. So could you tell us a little bit about what your career path has been like?
Sure. Yes. All right. Well, we need to start when I was in college. And I don't know if you guys have heard of an MRS degree, which is a Mrs. like somebody that's in college that is looking for a husband.
Oh, okay.
I would never have admitted that because I'm too much of a feminist to be like, I was looking for my husband in college and that's really all I was doing. But I was kind of close to that. I didn't have very large career aspirations, to be entirely honest. I've always been a great student and really like school and decided my career path by looking through. We had an actual catalog at the time, on paper and looking through and like literally crossing out, that's not me, that's not me, that's not me. We'll do this one then. So I landed on Spanish and communication and graduated and stumbled into a really random path. I was living in Chicago at the time and I took a trip to Nicaragua. It was like a medical missions trip, and my role was to interpret on the trip for the doctors that were providing care. And I loved it. I fell in love. I was like, this is so much fun. Why wouldn't I use Spanish in my career and be in the medical field? This is really cool.
Cool.
So I came back from the trip. I was working as a study abroad advisor at the time. So talking to college age students about where they should study abroad and advising them on that. and living in Chicago. And so I just started looking for jobs that were in hospitals that required Spanish. And this research assistant job came up, and it was at Cook County Hospital, which is that hospital that it's a super famous hospital because there have been several series made about it. It's an older one. I think it's called ER.
Yeah, yeah. It's like a soap opera. Yeah.
Okay, it's like exactly like soap opera. But anyway, that's where the interview was, the hospital for this research assistant. And in the interview, they're like, "So you have no research experience at all?" And I responded, "Well, no, but I can definitely learn and I speak Spanish. What more do you need? We're good." Obviously, I didn't say that exactly, but I did say very directly, "No, I have no experience, but I am willing to learn." And so I just remember it so distinctly. My would-be then boss, like, pulled, I mean, it's a really old hospital, like really old. So we were in the old nursing dormitories where this interview was happening. And so kind of the doors are connected. And I remember she like knocked on this door that was in her office, but not her office. And she pulls this older gentleman that spoke Spanish into the room. And he just sparked up a conversation with me to kind of test me, make sure that I could actually, speak fluently, et cetera. And then I think the next day they called me and were like, "Well, sure, you can have the job." And so that is where my research career started. And from there, I learned a lot. I had great mentorship there at the hospital. The doctor that hired me was really interested in developing people. She really wanted me to become a physician assistant. I was almost on that path, but ended up moving back to Ann Arbor 2 years after that, just because my family is in Ann Arbor. And I got to a point where I was like, well, what am I doing so far from my family? Not that it's so far, it's 4 hours to a lot of people, that's too close. But I love my family, and I knew that my parents were getting a little bit older, and I thought it would be valuable to move back. I always worked with oncology clinical trials. So I looked for a position at the Cancer Center at University of Michigan, and they hired me, which was awesome. And then from there, next move was into the industry. I got married in between there, and my husband and I had this plan to do our traveling of the world prior to retiring. So we decided that even if we had to quit our jobs, we would do that so that we could take some trips to places where we wanted to go before we started thinking about kids, before we weren't able to move a lot. And so we did that. And when I came back, I applied to a job that was in the pharmaceutical industry. The research experience that I had in the clinic really helped to jumpstart that portion of my career. And then from there, honestly, most of the moves were people saying, "Hey, you should apply to this job," and me being like, "Are you sure? I don't think I'm quite qualified." And them saying, "Yeah, you should definitely apply," and then it being given to me. So that's my career path in a nutshell, which was not such a nutshell.
Awesome. And did you ever go back to school?
Oh, yes, I did. I made the brilliant decision after our first child was a year old. Thought it would be a great time to go back and get a master's. It was middle of COVID. I didn't have to pay an application fee. I thought, hey, what do I have to lose? And yeah, so we then got pregnant with the second in the midst of that. And we've talked about Catalina. She's not a good sleeper. She's never been a good sleeper. So I have this newborn child. I'm trying to get classes done. I hear her just screaming and screaming and screaming as I'm trying to take these timed exams. It was quite the adventure, and perhaps not the wisest decision in the entire world. But my husband always says there's never a good time to get a master's. So I went back, I got an MBA, and it's definitely served its purpose already during my career. And I imagine it will continue to be applicable to future positions.
That is so amazing. Wow. I don't see how it's possible, but what I do know is possible is just like something about becoming a mom. You do start to feel like, well, I can really do some other things. Like if I could do this, if I just went through that labor,
That's true.
like
Right?
what else?
Hmm.
Like bring it on. Like, okay,
You can survive that newborn phase.
yes, you get your cape and then you just start flying. So that was quite a lot to juggle. So did you have any support systems in place to help you that you feel like allowed you to be successful through that early phase and then even now as a working mom?
Yeah. So, los abuelos. We are extremely fortunate to have my parents and my husband's parents within 10 minutes of where we live. And one cultural difference, and it's a pretty big one between Mexico and the US, is that there's essentially an expectation that the grandparents will take care of the grandkids when they come. And that's not just taking care of them, just making sure they're like healthy and well. That's like doing laundry, making sure everybody has a meal for the day. So we have a really amazing support system for raising these children, and it's helped tremendously, obviously, with having a career and going to get a master's. And we actually own a business as well. There's a lot of random things that we're involved with that we wouldn't be able to do without the support of our parents. But for me personally, definitely my husband has been a huge support. I would not have gone back to get my master's if he hadn't have said, you've always wanted your master's, like just go do it. And maybe I'm like, this is not a good time. It doesn't seem like a good decision. And him saying, no, 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 it's fine. It'll all work out. Just go, just do it.
I really remember the pandemic and this time where everything had slowed down. That's how I ended up with a pandemic baby
Okay.
and a pandemic degree because it was like, well, I mean, it seems like a good time to do something.
There's nothing else going on.
What a time to be alive. But it's still nonetheless like very amazing that he even reminded you and supported you. And that's just so awesome. So we heard about your support at home. Do you have any mentors to help with guiding you on your career?
I don't have like one mentor, if that makes sense. I have a mentor right now that is my go-to person for any questions in my role at the moment, which the role itself, it's called a clinical trial oversight manager. And my responsibility is for being the point of escalation for any issue, whether it's safety for patients or a quality concern at a hospital or a clinic, for any clinic that we work with in the Northeast and South of the United States. At the point it gets escalated to me, usually there's already been something that's been done to try and fix the problem. That requires a lot of mentorship because the problems that get to you are like, uh-oh,
It's like on fire.
yeah, yeah, like I'm just trying to think of a good example. Like, oh, there's no longer a doctor that's overseeing this trial because they left yesterday. What are you going to do about it? This mentor has been really great and she has helped develop me in the role itself. But I don't have one go-to person, I would say, that's a couple steps ahead of me, if that makes sense, that I like have leaned on and developed a relationship with. It is something that I've definitely thought about, but it's not something that has appeared for me. But I definitely have had people in the moment that have given me that push or said, it's time for you to do this, or no, you really can and have the ability and skill to do that position and you should go for it. I think the last three moves that I made career-wise would not have happened if I didn't have somebody that told me or said, I already put your name in for that position. Like things like that where you're just like, I don't have the experience. What are you talking about? So I've definitely been blessed to have mentors in that sense.
That's great. I think probably for me, Vanessa is definitely one of my mentors. So that's like an easy one.
Hey, mentee.
Oh,
Yes. But I think only recently in the last year or two, I even bought into the idea of how important having mentors for different things I think you're trying to achieve in life. And the mentors in my life right now are more so in the entrepreneurial world because I want to be an entrepreneur. I'm aspiring to,
Yeah.
and they're all moms. And so I am learning from them and talking to them kind of silences any noise in my mind around like, well, this person doesn't get it, or like, it's hard. It's like if I'm talking to a mom that has already built a business, she also talks to me a certain way,
Mm-hmm.
cuts through the noise as well, because we know that there's things that come up, but there's still a way to achieve your goals. Like you can still do it. So I do think that it's important.
Yeah.
I would agree. Tell us more about what you're pursuing.
Me?
Yes.
Okay, little segue. So I am an e-commerce brand owner and I'm also a designer. And I am building a cultural gift shop and it's called Black Star Gift Shop. And I have African prints for American life and travel kits to make traveling to Ghana, West Africa easy.
Nice pitch.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I love that. That's amazing.
So I want to back up a little bit to before your kids were here. Let's talk about pregnancy. Would love to hear about your pregnancy journey or anything you'd like to share about how your labor went.
Ooh, the juicy stuff. Yes. Well, so my first pregnancy, so I've had two pregnancies. My first pregnancy was quite literally a walk in the park. I didn't have any issues. And I mean, I didn't even have morning sickness. It was just my belly was growing and that was about it. My first labor was not a walk in the park. And I think the issue is that I didn't know that there was an issue until a couple months after I had already given birth. I think that you're so focused on keeping the baby alive that you forget to really advocate for yourself or think, does this make any sense that I haven't healed and it's been 8 weeks? There's, okay, not to get too gory on everyone, but there's a slightly different type of tissue after you have a baby. It's a kind of a glaring red tissue that is like not healed. And that is something that I still had going into the last week of August. So that baby was born in beginning of June, July, August. So it had been 3 months. And that after pregnancy tissue, we'll call it, because I don't know what else to call it, just hadn't healed yet. And I had a lot of pain, but I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to have pain at that point in time.
Yeah, 'cause it's like your first.
Yeah, exactly. And you just power through, right? Like you just had a baby and everybody's so excited about the baby and you're excited about the baby and nobody, I mean, people ask you how you are, but like you don't really know what to tell them. Like, well, I still have pain. Oh, yeah, that's normal, you know? So this definitely resulted in a lot of additional follow-up appointments because I kind of knew something wasn't right, but I really wasn't convinced something wasn't right because I'd never done this before. So I didn't really know what to expect or how quickly one should heal. I did know that they didn't clear me to go to the gym at that 6 week mark. And I was definitely confused about how other friends, were able to go and work out and do all this stuff at 6 weeks. And here I was double the time and still it hurt to walk down my driveway. So thankfully, I had been texting with a friend of mine that I used to work with at the cancer center, who also is a nurse, and, started chatting. She was asking some good questions about healing and things like that. And she kind of just got a little bit freaked out and was like, "You're what?" And started to ask some more questions. And then let me know about this clinic at the University of Michigan, which is called the Healthy Healing After Birth, I believe. I would need to look that up. It's a clinic for women that are not healing as quickly. It's really for any like complications post-labor. And they have this great team of people that from nurses to doctors to surgeons to psychiatrists that are able to help anyone that is having some type of issue. So her friend worked in that clinic and they were able to get me in the next day after I was texting with this old nurse friend of mine. And my husband and I went in and we talked to the surgeon actually, and she did an exam and she put me into surgery the very next day.
Wow.
She was like, "You're not in good shape. We need to do a surgery." And that was obviously a little bit shocking to me, but also really helpful because I was thinking maybe I was going to be in pain for the rest of my life. But it turns out that there actually was a problem and it did need to be fixed. And if we didn't fix it surgically, it wasn't ever going to heal. So I had the surgery that next day. And it required me to go completely under. I remember like freaking out. I'm like in the hospital bed pumping to send milk back to my son. And thankfully we don't live very, very far from the hospital. So that's good. But of course, there's a lot of complications that we won't get into of breastfeeding and all the other concerns that I was going to have because I was going to be out in surgery and how is that going to affect milk supply and everything else. But from that point, 2 weeks later, I was able to go to the gym. It was so quick, the healing after that surgery and after the follow-up appointments and everything else. The surgeon advised me that if I were ever going to have another child, vaginal birth was not going to be an option, that they would recommend a C-section. And I remember, I think it was actually our last appointment. I was like, "So I can't have any children anymore?" And she was like, "Well, you can have a C-section." I remember just feeling so stupid for asking that question. But, she was saying, like, you can't ever have another baby in this way. Yeah. So Catalina came through a C-section, and I would take that C-section 10 times out of 10 over the first experience.
My God. Wow. Christine, oh my gosh.
You are so strong.
So strong.
We do what we need to do.
There were so many moments, but you just took us through the moment of reaching out to your nurse friend and your nurse friend reacting so swiftly. Like,
Yes.
yeah, that is support,
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you pumping before surgery.
Girl.
Speechless. And speechless.
I had like milk spilling out over like the hospital bed and me be like,
Just like a few more seconds with the sound of it.
Totally. So embarrassing. You're in like the pre-op area where like it's not a room. It's, just some curtains and you're
Mhm.
But it's like you're so serious and that you're like, gotta get this milk. The baby. So nothing, even surgery, nothing could disrupt this.
It also made me think about how it's so important to reach out to our friends and family when they give birth to check in on like the deep check-in on how are you really doing? How's your body feeling?
Yes.
Just to like start that conversation, because sometimes it's so focused on the baby and the obvious. It's like, how's breastfeeding going? But it's like, actually, how's your body healing?
It's so important. And we just need to be there for each other and honest and upfront about what we're going through. And not even just post-birth, but just in general as moms, being willing to just be vulnerable and like, you know what? I really sucked at parenting today. I yelled at my daughter and, did this or whatever. But yeah, and post-birth, I think people are so focused on, oh, you have a baby, how beautiful. And it's hard to just be honest about what's going on with you. And you also don't know. Like that was the big thing for me. I just didn't know. And I had gone to a couple doctor's appointments and said like, hey, something's going on. Like, this doesn't seem normal, and this cream you gave me is not helping. But that still wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for them to be like, oh, let's do an additional check. Hey, maybe we should refer you to some other place because this is past our knowledge. I have nothing against midwives, but I gave birth with my first child with the midwives. And so it was kind of like a rotation. And I think part of it too was when they needed to bring in an attending physician, that person didn't know me. So they didn't know when I'm telling them I'm in a lot of pain, that like I'm really in a lot of pain. And it helps to know somebody, is my point. And because of that rotating system that I was in with the midwives where I was being seen, I think that just contributed to people not really knowing me. And I needed to advocate even more for myself.
Yes. I think that's another part of it is advocating and asking questions, maybe even pushing back.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We're going to definitely link in the show notes below the resource you shared for the University of Michigan, because I definitely didn't even know that existed. And
It's an amazing clinic.
yeah, so we share that resource for anyone who has questions or concerns around the way they're recovering afterward.
Yeah. And honestly, that's the best advice I can give to anyone. And you guys know as well is don't be afraid to ask the question, reach out for help. And it's so hard in that post-labor stage where you're just accepting help a lot of the time to also reach out for help. But if you feel like something's not right, ask, reach out. And yeah, that clinic is amazing. So
Yes, we will link it. Thank you. So we are going to transition to another topic. The topic we want to talk about is the makeup of your home and being in a bilingual or multicultural family. How did you decide to raise your children bilingually? Was it a conscious choice or did it just arise naturally?
yeah. So we speak Spanish at home, only Spanish. My native language actually is English. So my husband and I met in a Spanish speaking church. We have always spoken Spanish to each other, and that when you are bilingual, you kind of develop a certain language in which it's more natural to communicate. For my husband and I, because we started in Spanish and my level of fluidity is high enough to get to those core emotions, if that makes sense.
That's like as you're
Yeah.
building a relationship.
Yes,
That's
exactly, exactly. So it actually feels unnatural for me to speak to him in English. And in fact, most of the time, we try to be conscientious of who we're around. So if we're with English speaking friends, we try to speak to each other in English so that they can understand what we're saying. So the decision with the kids was an interesting one because I actually read a lot of research and books and wanted to kind of know what the best advice was for our kids because you don't want to ruin your kids and you want to make sure they can speak English and Spanish fluently if those are the two options that you have. And the research recommended that the native speaker speak to the child in the native language. So for me, that would mean that I would speak to Mateo and Catalina in English, and then my husband would speak to them in Spanish. So we talked about that. And we thought it would just be really, really awkward because here I would be like, oye, esposo, necesito blah, blah, blah. And then like try and switch into English with my kid because I wouldn't have stopped speaking Spanish to him.
right.
It just seemed like it was going to be really awkward. And the second thing is that we live in an English speaking culture and they pick it up really quickly at school. We're told that they do. We have yet to see that happen. But we're told that the kids will pick up whatever language it is that their peers speak really quickly. So we figured that, I mean, they have to learn English if we're living here and they'll eventually get it. So we decided to go with just full Spanish at home and then hope that they get English from their cousins and their grandpa and grandma on my side, as well as school and the rest of everything else that we do here in Ann Arbor.
Okay. So it's kind of a mix. It's really naturally, but then there was some conscious thinking around it.
Exactly. And the other thing that I read in the research is that the kids really naturally will start to be stronger in the language of the parent that they spend more time with. I think in our case, it probably would have been me as well. So I also just didn't want to run that risk of them being either stronger in English to start with or not wanting to speak Spanish because I was speaking to them in English and kind of those nuances.
There's a lot to consider,
Yeah.
Thanks for walking through that. It's like you did research, but you also had to think about how you guys got together, what made sense for your partnership, and then also raising your kids.
So how do you handle situations at school or daycare or interactions with your monolingual friends and family that would be speaking English?
Yeah, that's a great question. The way that we've decided to handle it, in this case, my fear of not being able to speak to my husband in Spanish and then my kids in English is kind of proved wrong because when we're in those environments, like an English speaking environment, for instance, we'll speak to the kids still in Spanish and whoever else in English. And it actually is pretty natural and switches pretty easily. We sometimes will say we speak Spanish to our kids just as like a intro for someone that we may not know or things like that. But we also have run into, and especially living in Ann Arbor, a lot of families that also don't speak English at home. They might speak Chinese or also Spanish or another language. So that's also cool to run up against as well, to see other families kind of taking the same strategy.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely. I live in Dearborn. So where I live, there's just all kinds of different people and different languages all the time. So I definitely know what you mean. And Arbor's super diverse as well. And then when you see parents with their littles, their older children, and they're not speaking English, I don't even think I really think about it too much. Vanessa, how about you? Do you think about it when you see that?
I don't really think about it very much. I think from all my time I spent in California, I heard so many different languages. Like even at work, people spoke in different languages in the office. So I think I've just gotten so used to it too. But I did want to tell you guys a fun fact. America is becoming more diverse, as we know, and there's actually now it's like 1 in 5 Americans speak a language other than English at home.
Oh, wow. That is a fun fact.
My husband speaks another language called Tree. It's TWI, pronounced tree, like TREE. And he's always on the phone talking in Tree. He's always speaking Tree. And it's like, there's some words that my brain has picked up, but because I haven't sat down and really formally started studying it yet, I want to. I don't know what he's saying, but it's just interesting that I'm immersed in another language all the time that I can't understand. And it's just a picture in my life at this point. So even for myself, I want to ask, do you have any advice for other mothers interested in raising their children bilingually? Any advice for their family members as well?
You're definitely going to run into the people that tell you that you're crazy and that you're living in an English speaking spot and your kids should be able to communicate in English or wherever, you may not be in an English speaking culture, but wherever you're living. But in that sense, I would just encourage people to think beyond and think about how valuable it will be to be able to speak 2 languages versus just one when that child is older. Because it's not just the language, it's also the connection to the culture.
Mm-hmm.
For me, culture and language really go hand in hand. And the more you immerse yourself into the language, the more you're also immersing yourself into that culture and vice versa. Because there are certain expressions and there are certain phrases or things that literally do not make sense. Like you cannot actually explain in another language. And if you can speak that language and just understand it in its native tongue, you're going to understand the culture better.
Yeah.
I just think it's extremely valuable. I'm curious, is your husband speaking to BK in Tree, or what have you guys decided to do?
So for what we're doing, my husband is not speaking to BK and Tree. He's teaching him phrases here and there. It's something that I'm reminding him of. I think because he's recently immigrated to America and he has never really given it that much formal thought, I think it's something that we're still figuring out. But I'm going to take matters in my own hands, like the tiger mom I am, and we will definitely be taking tree lessons very soon because we know that there's a little bit of a barrier with the teaching from my husband. My husband speaks tree as his fluent language, but that's not actually his tribal language. So it's not the native language of his parents. That became his language because they had moved to a different location in the country. So in a way, he's fluent, but he lived in a home where they were speaking three languages
Okay.
at
Yeah.
once. And so
Wow.
his ability to teach it is different than someone who is of the actual tribe, which is called the Shanti tribe. And that tree is their language. So there's a little nuance there that I think,
Yeah.
even though he knows it would be like two French people move to England. And so they know English and they're speaking French to each other and they're speaking English in the home.
Hmm.
And then now the child knows English and can understand French.
Hmm.
And then now the child moves to China and in the home is speaking English and Chinese. Well can they actually teach English to someone else?
Right.
Because they're not in England anymore. They moved to
Right.
China.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to definitely invest in that because I feel like it's very important that my son knows how to speak Tree to kind of hold on to his identity. If he loses the language, it will be tough for him to even be really included as being Ghanaian because the language for them is very, very important.
It's like you said, Christine, too, is just like the language brings you closer to the culture.
They go hand in hand. It's really interesting too. Like your point, Renee, about, that your husband just immigrated here because we have a lot of friends in the Hispanic community that they've immigrated here with kids. And the pattern that we see over and over again is that the parent who gets into the culture wants to speak English fluently and kind of practice English, ends up practicing it with their kid. And then the kid starts to speak less and less Spanish, and then they lose their Spanish. And it's something we've talked a lot about, my husband and I, because we really hope that doesn't happen with Mateo and Catalina because we really want them to be proud to speak Spanish. And part of it really does seem to be like a pride issue with our friends' kids of like, I don't want to be identified with that culture that I don't know because I'm in this culture and I speak English because I'm in this culture. And I think it's going to be a really big challenge for us to be encouraging Mateo and Catalina that they can still be part of both cultures. They can still speak Spanish fluently and at home with us, and they can speak English outside of the home and with their friends and teachers and everyone else, but that they don't have to either be ashamed that they speak Spanish or, ashamed of either one of the cultures, that they really can embrace both. So we're interested to see where that goes, given that I'm a native of this culture, and my husband's a native of a different culture.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. I love that we've taken our conversation. We're having like a deep dive now on just like cultural diversity and culturally diverse families.
And this has become so common.
Yes.
Yes.
Even on this episode, like it's really 2 out of the 3.
And I even feel like I'm a part of a multicultural family now, even though it's not my nuclear family, right? Because we've brought other cultures in through Renee's marriage and then also one of my cousin's marriage to a man from Tunisia. And actually, one of my cousins has moved to Australia. And so if he ever were to, we hope he does come back. But if he were ever to come back, I think that would add a new dynamic where it's like the language is the same. We'd be able to easily communicate, but it's different cultures,
Different English.
different accent. More and more families are identifying as multicultural families.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about an increase in number in like bilingual families, and now I think it's 10% of families in America are multicultural. Not everybody maybe wants to use that language. I'm using that language, multicultural, but I don't want to put that on you. So how do you identify? What word would you use?
I think the word that we would use is we speak Spanish at home. I don't know that we have one identity as a family. If you ask my oldest son what he is, he'll say he's Mexican, but he was born in a hospital 20 minutes outside of Ann Arbor. So in our definition of the word, he was born in the US, so he's American. But in his definition of the word, he's Mexican because that's where he identifies in terms of speaking Spanish and making tamales at Christmas and doing a lot of different things that are linked to that Mexican culture. I think it'll be really interesting to see what Catalina ends up saying she is, because I think that also there's another dynamic there with the second born. At least I've seen it in other families of they don't necessarily get as much of a influx of the culture as the first one does. And I'm not sure exactly why. I'm hopeful because we go back to visit friends and family in Mexico a couple times a year. I'm hopeful that that will be helpful to their understanding too of the culture. My husband would definitely say he's Mexican. I would probably say I was born here, but I consider myself to be slightly Hispanic or something along those lines, even though by blood I'm not. I think it's a plethora of different answers to how we identify.
And that's okay.
One thing that certainly I see in our nuclear family is that we almost never identify just as a nuclear family. We're always identifying with the grandparents and the cousins and the sister and the brother, and that's very cultural as well. But I think our identity is never really just us or our kids or our family, but it's who we are in this bigger picture of the culture.
How about you, Renee, and your family?
This is something that I think about a lot. I joke about a little bit on my TikTok, but with myself being Black American and my husband being African, externally, racially, we're not mixed, but we have a lot of cultural differences. And cultural differences with someone from Africa and America, it can be like night and day. There's a part of that that doesn't have to do with race, because you can be African, you could be Black racially, white racially, you could be Arab. But I just think that that foundation of fundamentally like being African and being American, it's just very, very different. I would say I feel like my home is like mixed, but it's just not racially mixed. And I think that that's where there's a lot of hyper focus on.
Right.
But I've had to learn how to cook so many different foods.
Yes! We didn't even talk about that.
I took my son to Ghana when he was 1. His grandma gave him a bath in herbs. And then 2 days later, he started walking. And he just has a lot of African stories already in his life. But we're the same, because my identity as a Black American is that I'm really in touch with my African ancestry. All the things that I've learned about the foods, the culture, you can start to trace all of these things back. Things like grits and black eyed peas on New Year's, and it's the same.
Mm.
Yes. And one of the recent health struggles I've been having is that I found out when I was pregnant that I have sickle cell trait. And sickle cell trait is very common in people with West African ancestry because it was a genetic modification that came from malaria. So it like kind of naturally protects you from getting malaria, which has served no purpose when you live here. But because my husband is from West Africa, like he's gotten malaria like 7 times in his life. So I know a lot about malaria randomly. So it's just a lot of like putting the pieces together. It's never a dull moment. That's kind of why I started my business, because I think it's very interesting. And I think people want to explore multiple sides of their identity.
Yes.
We've never had more mixing going on than we do now. And so I think that having an outlet, safe spaces to talk about it, and sharing, like how you just shared, Christine, about how you're identifying, it's just interesting. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thanks for sharing.
No, thank you. What I love about cultures is the language, certain traditions around holidays. Every single culture that you dive into has these similarities that are different, if that makes any sense at all. And when you said food, yeah, I'm sure we could probably spend another hour talking about the fact that my husband was unhappy in our marriage, not actually, but for 3 or 4 years until I could figure out how to cook Mexican food because that's what he wants to eat. And he doesn't want to eat this American food because yuck, what is that? It's so beautiful.
And then when you add little people into it, it becomes this whole other thing.
They look back to it and they remember. I'm sure, Renee, you've probably talked about this with your husband of like the different things around holidays or around food or around school or whatever it is, the different things that make those memories. You then want to share with your own children, and that desire of wanting to make sure that my children don't just have the beautiful memories that I had as a child, but also those that my husband had in a completely different culture, and somehow finding the way to mend those so that they can take a little bit of both cultures.
So we're going to wrap up our episode today with our final question that we ask all of our moms that come on to Motherhood Moments. So what is your normal evening routine? And what we mean is after bedtime. What do you do?
To be entirely honest, no one day is usually the same. In a 7-day period, it will either be a date with my husband because his cousin lives with us and we have this great ability to just be able to put the kids down and then just peace out, which is fun because we can just go and do whatever. Episodes of The Office is our current TV show that we're watching.
Classic.
Sometimes it's email that I didn't get to that day. Yep. A lot of times, at least in the summer, we're working on things for the business after bedtime. And in the summer, we'll do walks or something outside. But in the winter, we don't have any great getaways because it's cold and nobody wants to leave the house after 4 p.m.
For anyone listening that doesn't live up north, we've become bears basically when it gets cold here. Like we totally change all of our habits and then we emerge new in the spring. Oh, that's awesome. It's okay that you are sometimes working, sometimes answering emails. I think that's very relatable.
Yeah, especially with two. And I like that you get out on a date. It sounds like you get out on a date maybe like at least once a week.
At least, yeah. We both work from home, so our threshold of being home is short after bedtime. So it's fun to at least just get out of the house to, even if we go to the grocery store.
Oh, I love it. And that's a wrap. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Motherhood Moments podcast. We appreciate you because we know life gets busy. Maybe you are doing chores during nap time, on a walk, running errands, or rinsing berries. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. Vanessa and I are committed to keep sharing more motherhood wisdom. If you enjoyed this episode, please support us by leaving us a review. That's a wonderful way to show your support and let others know they are not alone. Until next time. And remember to check